Good morning. My name is David from 52 Churches in 52 Weeks. So they say, a lot can change in a year, and that's certainly the case with this channel. A little over a year ago, I made my before and after reaction video to my very first ward visit with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When I do my church visits, I try not to do any research because I don't want to form any biases or preconceptions walking in. And when I made my first ward visit, there was just so many different concepts that I was learning for the first time. Joseph Smith, Jesus in the Americas, a modern-day prophet, Lamanites, Nephites, celestial kingdom. These concepts were all very foreign to me. But at the same time, I found that it's a lot more, it's a healthier engagement, a healthier discussion when you try to just sit down and understand and listen. So I found a lot of beauty from that. And the thing that was just so perplexing to me was I've done over 100 documented church visits at this point. And with the Latter-day Saint church that I visited that day, the reception from members and the missionaries, and especially the follow-up, was so good as a first-time newcomer. It really made me ponder, why aren't more churches doing this? So what happened after that visit is it opened up a whole new world to me and opened up a lot of doors with different type of Latter-day Saint podcasts and interviews, and then also some other videos on this channel with temple visits and even general conference. It created an interest for myself where I probably never would have read the Book of Mormon before, but I've been trying to study. I'm going very slow with it, but just to understand more about that. But also, I've really been having an interest in Latter-day Saint history with the Pioneers and just the complex history behind it all. So as a result, I started to visit other restoration branches with their churches that may not be the mainstream LDS Church. Churches like the Community of Christ, the Church of Jesus Christ, which many refer to as the Bickertonite group, and also the Strangite Church. And at many of those churches, the reception from members were also really, really welcoming. And it just started to make me wonder what is going on here with Book of Mormon-believing churches and how they treat first-time visitors. So when I was driving back from General Conference this past April, I was driving home from Salt Lake City and I got a phone call from my good friend Steve Pynakker of Mormon Book Reviews. So he, along with Rick Bennett from Gospel Tangents, they were floating around this idea of holding a panel presentation at this year's John Whitmer Historical Association. This group, they specialize in Mormon history, research, and scholarship. And this year, the event was going to be held in Fredericksburg, Texas, but they were looking for a third person to be part of this presentation where YouTube podcasters would share their experiences with their engagement with different restoration branches. So my name got brought up. I accepted the invitation, and on my drive back, in the back of my head, I'm wondering, what did I just sign up for? In the span of just a little over a year, I walked in knowing nothing about Mormonism to now preparing for a presentation that would be held in a room in front of professors, scholars, and historians. So again, a lot can change in a year. So I made the visit not too long ago, and I'm really glad that I got to attend and just understand and learn more about Latter-day Saint history and just everything behind that from some of the best scholars and historians in the game today. So I made the visit a few weekends ago, got my little name badge as a first-time presenter, and the Sunday concluded with a hymn fest that was conducted by Brian Hales, who is a very well-known Latter-day Saint historian himself. So I'm going to share a little bit about what that sounded like and a few sites. I'll be back in a moment to share a brief takeaway from this visit. I
am a child of God, and He has sent me here, has given me an earthly home with parents kind and dear. Lead me, guide me, walk beside me, help me find the way. Teach me all that I must do to live with Him someday. I am a child of God, and so my needs are great. Lead me to understand His words before it grows too late. Lead me, guide me, walk beside me, help me find the way. Teach me all that I must do to live with Him someday.
To provide a little background about the John Whitmer Historical Association, it's obviously named after John Whitmer. He was an early church leader, an eyewitness to several important events, and also was handpicked by Joseph Smith himself to be the church's very first historian. Well, fast forward a century later, and there was a growing interest in Latter-day Saint history throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, so a number of historical associations were created, one of which was a JWHA. It was formed by several RLDS historians in Independence, Missouri, but they wanted it to be independent and free to dive into some of the historical controversies. So they invited several Utah LDS scholars as well, and this helped to create a platform for several historians and researchers to really dive deep into the history of the 19th century Latter-day Saints, but also the emerging restoration branches that emerged along the way. So for this year, it was in Fredericksburg, Texas, and this was such an interesting town to me. It was about 10,000 people, just small to medium-sized of a city, and it was very, very German. So one night I was talking with one of the waitstaff members, and he mentioned that with this town, they were still teaching German to grade school students up until the 60s. So if they ever had any Germans who came to visit, it was strange to them because it's like, that's how my grandpa would talk. Just very strange, because this was in the smack dab in the middle of Texas. With this year's annual conference in Fredericksburg, they wanted to dive deep into some of the Latter-day Saint history into Texas. So I got there late on Friday, so I didn't get to see many presentations from Thursday and Friday when this first started. But what I took away is with the keynote speaker, they really dug into Lyman Wight and the Whiteites. So when Joseph Smith was killed and martyred in 1844, Lyman Wight had been picked by Joseph Smith to kind of create a safe haven for the Latter-day Saints in Texas right before it became a state. And his group was able to actually build a temple. It was the first temple built west of the Mississippi. Well, Lyman Wight did not accept Brigham Young as the modern-day prophet within the Latter-day Saints moving to Utah. So they split, and the Whiteites were its own group for a while until Lyman Wight took to the teachings and the claims of William Smith and then Joseph Smith III. So when Lyman Wight passed away, his followers all joined up with the RLDS, the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that is now the Community of Christ. But what I found fascinating wasn't necessarily everything going on with the American frontier, but because this year it was in Texas, they wanted to go to the final frontier. So I caught a presentation from a historian named Tyler Anderson, and he did a presentation about Latter-day Saints in space. So he gathered all this research and investigated 3 Latter-day Saints named Don Lind, Richard Searfoss, and Senator Jake Garn. Jake Garn was very interesting to me because he was a Utah mayor of Salt Lake City, and then he became a Utah senator. And he was part of the subcommittee for NASA. And along the way, he thought, I guess there was a different type of program that was launching. And as a member of Congress, he wanted to put himself in outer space, having naval experience. And I guess it makes sense. I mean, if you're going to be putting tax dollars into NASA, what better than a U.S. senator to raise his hand and volunteer to be a part of this? So Tyler Anderson's presentation just brought forth all different types of challenges and opportunities that these men faced going into space. But at the same time, it was about their identity as Latter-day Saints and how that worked in NASA. And especially there was one story that he mentioned about how one of these astronauts would try to conduct communion with water and bread on Sunday mornings while in outer space. So just very, very interesting to hear about that. So then on Sunday, it was time for my presentation, along with Rick Bennett with Gospel Tangents and Steve Pynakker from Mormon Book Reviews. So Rick shared a number of interviews that he had with various restoration branches. Steve also gave his presentation. I think the most interesting part to me was interviews with 3 different men who had claimed to see Jesus Christ from different restoration branches, and his reaction and just being open-minded as he interviewed them. Then it was my turn, and I tell you, I was nervous heading into this. And so I gave my presentation with my various visits to different restoration branches, just because I have such a different contrast compared to the 100 other different churches I've been a part of. So I talked about the Strangites, and with the Strangite Church, it was very interesting because this church was so involved with Zoom for the different Strangites across the United States. With the Church of Jesus Christ, with the Bickertonite group, the one that I went to, they usually would have pictures at the end of every church service to kind of have that church family atmosphere so that you really felt as a part of just not the church, but a part of a family. And then I also shared my experience to General Conference and just the reaction I had from the various street preachers that were basically persecuting Latter-day Saints walking into the conference center. After our presentations, a number of conference attendees got the chance to ask us questions. And in the back of my mind a little bit later, I started to wonder about the religious background of those that were attending this event. Because how many were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? How many came from the community of Christ? How many may have been ex-Mormons? But because I didn't know, I think that was one of the beauties to an event like this. I ended my presentation talking about my time with Bill Shepard. He's the Strangite historian, and with the Strangite Church, it's only about maybe 100 people. Bill shared his journal entry that he gave me when he served as a JWHA president from 2008 to 2009. And when he made his very first JWHA conference in 1994, there were rumors that there was a Strangite in attendance. And fate had it that day that he got to talk with Stanley Kimball, who's a very famed LDS historian. Well, during their discussion, Bill let him know that he was the Strangite in attendance. And to his surprise, Stanley took his hand out, shook his hand, and said, "Welcome, brother." So despite their very different beliefs, he was still warmly accepted. And even for me as a Protestant, I just was so thrilled to be accepted to an event like this. I was reading a blog post the other day from Kyle Bashirs. He's a Baptist minister who also specializes in Strangite history. And he often gets the question, okay, what is the most obvious difference between Latter-day Saints and evangelicals? But one time he got asked the question, what is the most unobvious difference between Latter-day Saints and evangelicals? And that one caught him off guard. And as he thought about it more, he noticed that when he would read different Latter-day Saint literature, it often dove into pioneer Latter-day Saint history in the 19th century. Whereas with the Protestant books that he would read, it usually just dived straight into theology, straight into the Bible. And I think that is something worth noting, and especially seeing an event like this. So on Sunday morning, we had a hymn festival, and we sang all kinds of different hymns from different restoration branches. So we sang an 1847 hymn from Lyman White with the Whiteites, but then we also sang hymns from the Community of Christ, the Strangite Church, and also the Utah LDS Church. And there was one hymn that a BYU professor gave some context and history on, and that was a song, I Am a Child of God. If you're a Latter-day Saint, you probably heard this a million times. For me, this was the very first time I heard it. And she talked about, with Heavenly Father's love, it's compared to the warmth and the light of the sun. Well, she talks about a personal story that she had meeting Mother Teresa in Calcutta. And she got to witness Mother Teresa minister and serve those around her. And as a result, it had a profound impact in her pursuit of healthy interfaith dialogue, such as events like this. So having seen this, it really got me wondering about Latter-day Saint history and how important that is, because with my Protestant view, I'm seeing in a much more secular society, we're almost stripping away these hymns from back in the day and replacing it with all this contemporary, more modern, more Justin Bieber-like music. But to hear these hymns from the 19th century on, there's this culture that is tied together so strongly into the faith. We're going to wrap it up on that. Hope you enjoyed this visit to the John Whitmer Historical Association, held this year in Fredericksburg, Texas. As always, make sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date for future videos. But until next time, hope you have a good one.